All right. I haven't done this in a while, so this is a pause and play of David Ray Griffin. And as you can see, it's a lecture in Seattle on May 18th of 2007. So Griffin is a remarkably respected theologian who has entered the September 11th conspiracy fold, but he's a fringe conspiracy theorist. And there's going to be a couple of things he probably will say in this video that we have to discuss because they are either going to be incorrect or that he is misinterpreting, but maybe there isn't. But he has a history of it. So this is only an hour long, so it's 53 minutes. So let's see where this goes. Seattle, Washington. Just like a lot of lectures out of Seattle during this time period between 2005 to 2010. And I consider 2005 to 2010 to be the peak period of 9/11 truth. You had a lot of people that were active in the streets, people online. So this was, to me, my experience was this was really the peak, but unfortunately, most of the attention was given to the fringe conspiracy theorists. And sad to say that Dave Ray Griffin was one of them. And most of these fringe conspiracies, such as no planes or no hijackers or swap planes, fake phone calls, these still exist today because of the people like Dave Ray Griffin who purported them 15 years ago.
My name's Dr. Richard Curtis, and I'm a member of the steering committee, 9/11 Truth Seattle. I first met our featured speaker as a student at the School of Religion at Claremont Graduate University. When I arrived in Claremont, Dr. David Ray Griffin was world famous as a theologian and an authority on the school of theology called Process. I found him to be engaging and compelling, a deeply thoughtful figure and rigorous in his academic work. As a professor at the Claremont School of Theology and at Claremont Graduate University for 30 years, Dr. Griffin was also a co-director of the Center for Process Studies.
Yes,
And some did what questions. And David Ray Griffin?
I am in fact old enough to remember.
Go back a little bit. This is it.
Good evening. I'm glad to be speaking here in Washington, the state in which I was born a few years ago. I am in fact old enough to remember a popular song called "Let's Get Physical." Shortly after that song came out, it was very popular. A friend of mine, knowing my philosophical proclivities, gave me a button to wear to parties saying, "Let's get metaphysical." Now that I've been involved in the 9/11 Truth movement for several years, I have a new plea. Let's get empirical.
Yeah, this is the problem, right? Because at the peak of like these fringe conspiracies, and when I say fringe, I'm talking about the irrational theories. I'm a conspiracy theorist regarding 9/11, but I have some questions about some things that are questioning the narrative of, say, the 9/11 Commission report or the misfindings of the Joint Inquiry report, or the misinformation, the information that wasn't reported by the FBI pen bomb investigation about additional hijackings, or the fake reporters at Bush's elementary school on the morning of 9/11, things like this. So I would say that between those years of 2005 to 2010, I could say 12, but right around then, what happened? I mean, we saw prominent films that are still prominent today, like Loose Change, A New Pearl Harbor by Massimo Mancuso, In Plain Sight, which was predating those dates. I think that came out 2004, I think, by Dave Von Kleist. And there's so many more. And then you have lectures by Barbara Honegger, David Ray Griffin, Christopher Bolin. These people wrote books. These people went on tour, and they repeated the same misinformation, the same disinformation that still exists today. And it comes from their ignorance regarding, one, the intelligence services, two, their distrust 100% of the official narrative, whatever that may be, which is an often vague term, and three, their lack of understanding of the ideology of the hijackers or Al-Qaeda in general, right? It's not black and white. Nothing is. For those who believe in these transparent humanistic beliefs of religion, of racism, of politics, any of the isms, they're led to believe that there is a black and white world. But if you're outside of that lens and you don't look at 9/11 saying, I know there's an inside job, that's like a criminal investigator going to a crime scene saying, oh, I know what didn't happen here. If you do this, you're only going to look at information that agrees with your worldview. Unfortunately, Dave Ray Griffin has done that, and we're going to see that tonight probably.
And that's the title of my lecture tonight, 9/11, Let's Get Empirical. The reason I make this plea is explained in the first page of my new book, Debunking 9/11 Debunking. I begin by saying the evidence that 9/11 was an inside job is overwhelming. Most people who examine this evidence with an open mind find it convincing. The only problem is to get people, especially journalists, to examine this evidence.
Well, you shouldn't be going to journalists for one. What you should be doing is getting to the independent journalists, in which you did, but they rejected a lot of your stuff because you simply were coming from a very fringe mindset. I don't know what else to say other than that. If Dave Ray Griffin, one of his main arguments about 9/11 being an inside job were the phone calls, that they were fake. Now, I hear this time and time again from people today. Now, the claims that are made by Griffin later on in other lectures and in his book, suggesting that the phone calls are faked, well, he claims that it's from a voice morphing system. Now, the founder of voice morphing is Dr. George Papkun, who addressed this issue, saying that in 2001, in order for voice morphing to work, he had to record the person's voice while they were saying it. So, in other words, if these phone calls were faked, that means Papkun had to have been sitting next to these people recording their voices. Now, of course, this can't be feasible because all these people died in the plane crash. So there's a problem right there.
Many of them believe that they need not do this because they already know that the claim that it was an inside job is false.
Here's a problem. Did he go into 9/11 already with that mindset that 9/11 is an inside job no matter what? That we can't accept the narrative of what the 9/11 Commission report stated? Or did they say that we can't trust anything the government says, so we'll have to make scenarios that are against that narrative, or we'll have to believe some scenarios that are against the narrative? Now, this was what devastated the truth movement to begin with, right? So the majority of the 9/11 truth movement, who had their right to question the government, right? That's what the Jersey Widows did, but they didn't consider themselves a truth movement. Later on, people like David Ray Griffin and others, they basically replaced the Jersey Widows and stated that we can't believe the 9/11 narrative, even if some of it's true, such as plane hijackings, because plane hijackings represent the official narrative. So whatever theory, no matter how irrational it is going to be supported by the 9/11 truth movement because it goes against the official narrative.
So many journalists, whether writing for the New York Times or the Guardian or the Progressive or the Nation, have pontificated about 9/11 while revealing that they know virtually nothing about the relevant facts. The question about what happened on 9/11 can be answered responsibly, however, only on the basis of a knowledge of these facts. And yet many journalists, like many other people, have used various means to avoid getting empirical about 9/11. One way to avoid getting empirical relies on an ambiguity in the term conspiracy theory. There are two main theories about what happened on 9/11. According to the government's theories, the attacks were planned by members of Al-Qaeda under the inspiration of Osama bin Laden. According to the alternative theory,
See, right there, what I just said before, that the official theory is that 19 men from Al-Qaeda hijacked 4 planes. That's true. They did. But does that mean that that's it? That's the official narrative? No, it's not. It's a microcosm of what the 9/11 Commission report states. Now, in the report, as I said this before, there are 14 chapters. It's over 500 pages long, and most of these people haven't read it. Griffin, I think, did read it. One of the few that probably did. However, he is ignorant regarding, say, the Wahhabi ideal, or that how these intelligence services, foreign or domestic, basically intervene with, say, data collection regarding these people that they're monitoring. You'll never hear him say anything about Alex Station. You won't hear anything about him saying anything relevant, in depth regarding Able Danger. These are operations that were conducted by the CIA and the NSA and the DIA, respectively, as well as the NSA was monitoring the phone calls of bin Laden and Al-Qaeda communications hub in Yemen. He's not going to be talking about that tonight, I guarantee it. And that's where the essence of all 9/11 is right there. It's in data, information about operations before they even materialize, so that you can manipulate to your advantage and take advantage of your advantage by allowing them to happen. That is a reasonable scenario. It's something that's backed up by some evidence of it. I mean, the CIA basically intentionally withheld information from the FBI regarding 2 Al-Qaeda operatives living inside the United States and having dual US visas. What else haven't they told us? Same thing for the NSA, the FBI? Who knows?
the attacks were orchestrated or at least assisted by forces within our own government.
Right, and that alternative theory is based on speculation, nothing more. If you're going to say that 9/11 was created by the government, well, you have no evidence to show for that. There's no documentation. There's no eyewitnesses to this. You have nothing. And you talk about empirical evidence. Let's get empirical. That's what you said. Well, that I would need empirical evidence, because these are very egregious claims you're making. Remarkable claims needs remarkable evidence.
Many people, including
I'm simply not going to believe the words of somebody because they say that the official narrative has to be opposed at all costs. Well, okay, I'm with you about opposing the official narrative, whatever that is. Do you have evidence to show that your alternative narrative is demonstrably true? Let's see.
many journalists, assume that the 9/11 truth movement's theory can be dismissed a priori because it is a conspiracy theory. But a conspiracy, says my dictionary, is an agreement to perform together an illegal, treacherous, or evil act. To hold a conspiracy theory about some event is, therefore, simply to believe that that event arose out of such an agreement. This is, we can say, the generic meaning of conspiracy theory. Given this generic meaning of the term, we are conspiracy theorists if we believe individuals have conspired to rob banks, that oil companies have conspired with scientists for hire to conceal the reality of human-caused global warming, or if we believe that American presidents have conspired with members of their administration to fabricate pretexts for going to war. In other words, once we get empirical about the term conspiracy theory, we realize we're all conspiracy theorists. Announcing that one rejects conspiracy theories has become almost a reflex action. But we would be more honest if we, with Michael Moore, would say, now, I'm not into conspiracy theories, except for those that are true.
Well, here's a great quote by Alan Moore, and it's a conspiracy quote. The main thing that I learned about conspiracy theory is that conspiracy theorists believe in a conspiracy because that is more comforting. The truth of the world is that it is actually chaotic. The truth is that it is not the Illuminati, it is not the Jewish banking conspiracy or the great alien theory. The truth is far more frightening. Nobody is in control. The world is rudderless. And that's a great quote, right? You never know who's in charge. You don't know who's doing what. And the actions of those in power seem to be irresponsible and ill repute and without direction at times.
In spite of the obviousness of this point, many journalists follow propagandists in using the term conspiracy theory as an accusation.
Right.
We can call this the propagandistic meaning of the term. Those who use the term in this propagandistic way ignore its generic meaning. They thereby equate theories as such, conspiracy theories as such, with a particular type of conspiracy theory, that is, the ones that are irrational, unscientific, kooky. Now, there are certainly many conspiracy theories of that nature. But our newspapers and TV news programs reveal some new conspiracy almost every day as a fact. So it is dishonest. It is pure propaganda to imply that all conspiracy theories are unworthy of belief. Those who use the term in this propagandistic way against the 9/11 truth movement never point out that the government's theory, which they endorse, is also a conspiracy theory. That the only difference between the two theories is the identity of the conspirators. For example, Jim Dwyer of the New York Times wrote a story entitled, "Two U.S. Reports Seek to Counter Conspiracy Theories About 9/11. A more accurate title would have been, "Two U.S. Reports Say Government's Conspiracy Theory is Better Than Alternative Conspiracy Theory." In an essay entitled, "Enough of 9/11 Conspiracy Theories Already," Matthew Rothschild of The Progressive said, "Here's what the conspiracists believe. 9/11 was an inside job. Members of the Bush administration ordered it, not Osama bin Laden. Arab hijackers may not have done the deed. The Twin Towers fell not because of the impact of the airplanes and the ensuing fires, but because of explosives. I'm amazed at how many people give credence to these theories." He did not have a paragraph saying, "Here's what the government's conspiracists believe. 19 hijackers with knives and box cutters defeated the most sophisticated defense system in history. Hani Hanjour, who could barely fly a Piper Cub, flew an astounding trajectory to crash Flight 77 into the Pentagon, the most well-protected building on the planet. Other hijacker pilots, by flying planes into 2 buildings of the World Trade Center, caused 3 of them to collapse at virtually free-fall speed, straight down. I'm amazed at how..."
See, now here's the thing about that quote, right? So Griffin is incredulous to think that Rothschild would write this quote because, oh, the fringe conspiracies or the alternative conspiracies are much more irrational than the government conspiracy. Well, here's a hint. Yes, they are. So what Griffin is basically stating here, that Hani Hanjour couldn't fly a plane, even if he wanted to, that he flew at these amazing trajectory speeds, defeated the most powerful system in the world. This is really, I hate to say it, but it's disingenuous. Let me tell you why. Is that he's not telling you about, like, say, the intelligence services who may have been listening to the phone calls of some of these people. Now, there was foreign intelligence monitoring people out west. That's what's the Saudis. The Israelis were using the Israeli art student ring and the movie companies to monitor members of the Hamburg cell. The Hamburg cell were basically these young men from Germany, Mohammed Atta, Marwan al-Sheh, Ziad Jarrah, who were members of a mosque, Al-Quds, which was located in Hamburg, Germany. And that's where they became the Hamburg cell, because they were being radicalized or controlled by forces like its imam and Al-Qaeda operatives, German, Syrian Al-Qaeda operatives, who were controlling these people. Now, who were controlling those people? The CIA were basically monitoring two of these people that were grooming the members of the Hamburg cell, like Mohammed Haydar Zamar and Marmoun Darkanzali. There's no evidence that they were CIA operatives, but there is some interesting aspects about their backgrounds and profiles. Regarding out west, Hani Hanjour actually was a University of Arizona student in 1992, and he was in Arizona and in California with two other hijackers, the first two to enter the country, Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi, who were followed by Saudi operatives like Fahad al-Tamari, an imam at the King Fahd Mosque in Los Angeles, Culver City. Omar al-Bayoumi, Osama Basnan. These were Saudi government agents for a Saudi government firm in Riyadh who are being paid a government salary. And this has come out in the new cache of declassified files from the FBI. And they were getting money from a bank account, some money anyway, from former US Saudi ambassador Bandar bin Sultan through his wife Haifa bin Faisal. And the FBI basically were trying to get as much information from the CIA and the NSA, and they weren't giving it because they knew that the FBI would begin monitoring these people inside the country, in which they didn't want. You get what I'm saying? So if Hani Hanjour was inside the United States and he was being monitored by foreign agencies, what information did the Saudis collect on these people? Also, I didn't know you had to be an expert to fly a plane. I didn't know you had to be an expert to crash a plane. Most of the planes, well, allegedly, Hani Hanjour was a pilot for American Airlines Flight 77. Now, there's information from DJ Thermal Detonator in his film 6 on 77, where there could have been a sixth hijacker. Could he have been the pilot? Moazed Kanir was his name. The media basically said that that was Hani Hanjour. He was an individual dressed in black shoes, and a black bag. Who is that person? Nobody knows. So even if Hani Hanjour maybe could have flew the plane, even though he was a terrible pilot, according to Ray Griffin and certain fringe conspiracy theorists, he did have his commercial ratings license, just like all the hijacker pilots did. And like I said, they weren't going for careers. They just knew how to have rudimentary education in flying the plane, knowing where the autopilot is. Most of Flight 77's flight was on autopilot till it got near its direction. So do you think Ray Griffin's going to bring all that up? No.
How many people give credence to these theories? It did not occur to Rothschild to say this because he uses conspiracy theory as a term of abuse for conspiracy theories that he does not believe.
You do it to yourself, right? If you're going to make these outrageous claims, such as fake phone calls or no hijackers, or even go one further and say there weren't even physical planes, Ray Griffin doesn't say that, others do, then yes, And if you represent the 9/11 Truth Movement, then it was up to the 9/11 Truth Movement to dispel these theories. Guess what? They never did. And so they're held liable. And because they wanted as many people as possible to join their ranks, because at that time, between 2005 to 2010, quantity was more important than quality, even if the most irrational theories were being propagated within the group. They didn't care. But now having those people in their group really came back to bite them in the rear, because as of this moment, nobody takes 9/11 Truth Movement seriously. They're not interviewed by anyone. They're dying out. Their groups are dying out. And very few people are interested. I went to Ground Zero last year. It was the 20th anniversary. I counted maybe 20 to 25 people in the Truth Movement there. They're a dead movement. I know some people don't like to hear it, but they are. And the reason why is because these fringe conspiracies continue to haunt them 16 years later on. And the public can see right through it. And for those who don't know anything about 9/11, they're hesitant to say, hey, you know, I've heard about this group. That's not the government's fault. That's not the regular people's fault. That's your fault. You allowed these people like Ray Griffin to go unchecked. Hey, by the way, what's your evidence that the phone calls are fake? Well, as long as it's against the official narrative, we don't care. Come in. That's what you did.
A senior editor for In These Times, writing about his experience in 2005 of seeing my C-SPAN lecture, 9/11 and American Empire, wrote that, having always thought highly of Griffin, it was shocking to see him pushing a radical conspiracy theory about 9/11 on C-SPAN. What could have transformed this sober, reflective scholar into a conspiracy theorist?
Reasonable question, right? You're a respected, highly respected theologian. What made you want to propagate these really fringe conspiracy theories, such as living hijackers or fake phone calls? I mean, that's fringe conspiracy. There's no evidence for this whatsoever. None. That's why it's fringe. It's irrational to say that hijackers are alive. Why hasn't the Truth Movement ever interviewed one? Why hasn't the media ever interviewed one? Why hasn't anybody ever interviewed one? Because they don't exist. Because you took a BBC article out of its context, which I know you're going to bring up, and I'll clarify more when you do.
The truth, of course, was that I had been a conspiracy theorist all along. But I didn't become a conspiracy theorist in his eyes until I rejected the government's conspiracy theory in favor of the alternative.
Right, exactly. That's what I was talking about. As long as it's against the official narrative, it has to be opposed, because we can't bring ourselves to believe that planes were hijacked by Arab fundamentalists. And yeah, this is the only time in history where I ever hear. Now, there's been hijackings before by Arab fundamentalists, especially the PLFP, the Palestinian Liberation Front, the group Hezbollah, Imad Mughniya. I mean, you know, even conducting terrorist attacks like the Abu Nidal organization in the mid-1970s and early 1980s, where they bombed and shot up a airline airports in Vienna and in France, I believe. Could be wrong. Was it Italy? Italy and Israel? No, Italy and Germany. I think Italy and Germany.
Writers can't think.
I mean, these groups exist, but I never heard anybody besides on 9/11 where planes can't be hijacked. Even with the Algerian Islamic group in 1993, when they hijacked Air France 95, I believe, could be wrong about that, where they were going to crash it into the Eiffel Tower. You didn't hear anything about that being a fake hijacking, or there were fake hijackers. Only on September 11th, strangely, that planes can't be hijacked by actual Arab fundamentalists. Strange.
In these terms, all the more could they not dare to think that the reason I changed from the one theory to the other was that I finally got empirical. I went from knowing virtually nothing about the relevant facts to knowing quite a few of those facts. Once we realize that both major theories about 9/11 are conspiracy theories, we can then see that we must evaluate them in the normal way. Ask which of the two theories stands up best in terms of the relevant facts. We must get empirical. The whole basis for the Bush administration's attack on Afghanistan and its more general war on terror has been the claim that the attacks of 9/11 were carried out by Arab Muslim members of al-Qaeda under the leadership of Osama bin Laden. This claim, however, was never proven.
Yes, it was actually. Now, here's the thing, right? You have al-Qaeda attacks, especially in Tanzania and in Kenya, where they bombed U.S. embassies. You had the bombing of the USS Cole in October of 2000. You had failed plots such as the Millennium Bomb plot, which was an international operation involving members of al-Qaeda in Yemen and even other rogue elements of Arab fundamentalists. One such individual named Abu Musab al-Zarqawi in Jordan. Now, if that name sounds familiar, he was the head of a group called Wal Jihad al-Tawhid, which later became the Islamic State in Iraq, which later became the Islamic State and the Levant, which is basically an offshoot of this prison gang that started in Jordan under the tutelage of one of the most dangerous Muslims in the world, Muhammad al-Maqdisi, who was considered a scholar to Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, who, by the way, wasn't even a religious fundamentalist at first. He was a pimp, he was a murderer, and he was a thug in jail until he got out, and then he found God. Much like a lot of these al-Qaeda members who are illiterates, who are coming from the poorest regions of the Arab world, especially in Qatar or Saudi Arabia and the Philippines and Indonesia. And this is where religion, especially fanatical religion, doesn't pertain to Islam, but this radical fundamentalist group called the Wahhabis, which are basically an anti-ethical group to the Sunni Islamic group, and the Sunnis consider this a branch, but they're not really Islamic. They're basically from the fundamentalist Muhammad ibn al-Wahhab, who is the co-founder of the Emirate of Diriyah, which was basically the kingdom of Saudi Arabia later, when Ibn Saud took over the cities of Hejaz and Najd in the early 20th century, late 19th century. So does Griffin know anything about Wahhabism? Does Griffin know about the backgrounds of some of these hijackers? Well, if you don't believe in hijackers, you don't need to study this. And this is what I'm trying to tell people in the truth movement. You should. And you should understand that most of these people that were involved with the September 11th hijackings come from, especially the muscle hijackers, come from the poorest regions of the Arab world, southern and northern South Arabia. Now, the hijacker pilots, except for Hani Hanjour, most of them came from Egypt, Lebanon, and the United Arab Emirates. Mohammed Atta from Egypt, Ziad Jarrah from Lebanon, and Marwan al-Shehi from the United Arab Emirates. They were educated. And they were selected as pilots because they spoke some English and they were educated and they were clean cut. The muscle hijackers, they're basically useless other than to hold the people back from storming the cockpit. That's all they need to do. They don't even need to know about it being a martyrdom operation. Now, a couple of those people made martyrdom wills. I have some of them, video wills. But they're not the more interesting people. The interesting people are the pilot hijackers. And once you get into the backgrounds of, say, Mohammed Atta and Ziad Jarrah, you're going to find some anomalies that wasn't told to you by the US federal government. And in fact, it was hidden from you, especially Ziad Jarrah. But like I said, if you don't believe in hijackers or hijacked planes, you're not going to look into the backgrounds of these people. You're not going to look into the intelligence services who are monitoring those people for years prior to 9/11.
Shortly after 9/11, Secretary of State Colin Powell promised to provide a white paper showing that bin Laden was responsible.
True.
But this paper was never produced.
Now that's true, right? There was supposed to be a white paper that Colin Powell was going to produce, but he said that he's going to wait until after the trial. Well, that trial still hasn't happened yet, so it's the year 2022, and Colin Powell is deceased. So we were never really given any real evidence besides the confession tape, which I'm pretty sure Griffin's going to state. Now, remember this, even if you want to say that that tape is false, Al-Qaeda never deemed it as false either. And this was, known for the last 15 years. Ayman al-Zawahiri, he's in the tape. Yeah, by the way, he's still alive. He just did a video. He's never denigrated the tape either as false. So
the Taliban said that it would gladly hand over bin Laden if only the United States would provide evidence of his involvement of 9/11, but the Bush administration refused.
That's not necessarily everything, though. I mean, yes, they said, George Bush said, we don't negotiate with terrorists. They were going to invade Afghanistan anyway, but I think that was in the plans long before 9/11 anyway. On the other hand, the Taliban did hold meetings in the year 2000 and 2001 with, say, the director of the Saudi General Intelligence Directorate, Prince Turki bin Faisal. And Prince Turki bin Faisal actually went to the High Council of the Taliban, and it wasn't Mullah Omar, it was the High Council in Pakistan. That's where the Taliban are from. And they held a meeting with the Taliban in Afghanistan, along with the High Council, and basically said that the Taliban were growing very weary of bin Laden. They told him not to have any interviews with Western media, to stop threatening the United States, and don't do terrorist attacks against the United States. Bin Laden, agreed to this, but he didn't agree, obviously. And basically, the Taliban refused to hand over bin Laden according to old Pashtunwali laws. Now, I'm not going to get into this video. Look up Pashtunwali laws, which predate Islam. And that's the reason why the Muslim community in the Taliban did not want bin Laden handed over to the West. Because if the Muslim world found out that a Muslim organization like the Taliban handed over a fellow Muslim to, say, the West and Israel, they would be absconded as Muslims. They would be considered takfir or munafiq, fake Muslim. But they are takfiri. That's a different story. I mean, that's religious indifference, and I'm not going to get into that.
Leading a Taliban spokesman to say,
I would say the Taliban really, would I consider them takfiri? Yes, Egypt would be takfiri. Egyptian Islamic Jihad, Gamma Islamiyah, Abu Sayyaf.
we have asked for proof of Osama's involvement, but they have refused. Why? The 9/11 Commission, in spite of Kane and Hamilton's stated commitment to go to the facts, makes no mention of any of these facts. In claiming that
you know why? Because a lot of it's missing, David Ray Griffin, okay? And this is what the 9/11 truth movement really, I'm not generalizing them, but proponents of the fringe conspiracy just don't realize that most information was kept from the members of the commission. That's coming from their own mouths. And that's why Max Cleland, who is a panelist of the 9/11 Commission, left, because he figured out that Zelikow, the director, wasn't being forthright with information coming from, say, the CIA or the NSA. Were Saudi and Israeli intelligence mentioned in the 9/11 Commission report? Was the NSA's wiretapping of bin Laden's satellite phone, of the Yemen hub in Yemen, the house in Yemen, or the Able Danger program? None of this was mentioned in the 9/11 Commission report. None of it.
they started with the facts. Kane and Hamilton say that their commission was not setting out to advocate one theory or interpretation of 9/11 versus another. And yet,
Right, because they wanted to tell a story. And some of the story is true, okay? Not everything is false. You have to read the report. And I'm uploading it on my WordPress, so you can read it for free, chapter by chapter, page by page. Please go read it. I have the entire playlist of the 9/11 report, 9/11 Commission. I'm the only person in the world to upload it, as well as the Joint House Inquiry. Go watch it. It's not in 3-hour videos. I cut it manageable to 5 minutes per upload, 5 to 10 minutes a piece. So go watch it. Go learn. You'll notice that not everything is false, but not everything is true. Most of it's missing.
they tell us, when we set up our staff teams, we told one team to tell the story of Al-Qaeda's most successful operation, the 9/11 attacks. If that's not starting with a theory, what would be?
Well, no, it's not a theory if it's a fact. Now, look, Al-Qaeda, we have information that Al-Qaeda was in preparation to the planes attacks. That's true. That's true. Now, what you're not going to say, which is what the government also won't say, is that the attacks may have been known to the intelligence services like the NSA and the CIA, even to the Israelis and Saudis, prior to the State Department even learning about it themselves, or they weren't even aware of it. The FBI certainly wasn't. Neither was the State Department. Neither was the National Security Council, which is the highest levels of the federal government. Now, could some members of NORAD, in preparation so that defense jets couldn't have been interfering with these hijackings? Damn straight. They gave a false timeline in the 9/11 Commission, and basically members of the 9/11 Commission even said that and asked them for a right timeline, which they have yet to provide. Are you going to talk about that? No. You'd rather talk about the fringe conspiracies because they oppose the official narrative. And Griffin, you don't have to do that. You don't have to do that. All you have to do is mention the missing information, which is known to the public, which was known to you in 2007 when you did this lecture. Now, I don't know whether you were influenced by people that you aligned yourself with, but you did what you claimed the government did. You went with a story because it fit your worldview, your narrative, the story you wanted to tell. Because just like the government can't bring themselves to advocate for alternative theories, because some of those alternative theories are true. But for you, you come from a fringe mindset, and that you can't believe any of the official story, even if it's true, like hijacking planes, because you're afraid that that will be advocating for the official narrative. And that official narrative has to be opposed at all costs. So right there, you are just as guilty as the federal government in not wanting to believe the other side, because the other side represents the other side.
The 9/11 movement, by contrast, has gotten empirical about this matter. With regard to the alleged hijackers, there was, according to the government, much evidence that implicates them, such as video frames of them at airports, passports found at crash sites, and Mohammed Atta's luggage filled with incriminating evidence that they say is luggage that was supposed to get on Flight 11. The 9/11 Truth Movement, however, has pointed out that none of this evidence can withstand scrutiny. It contains absurdities, such as when the first plane to strike the World Trade Center is said to have resulted in a passport jumping out of the plane and falling to the ground unsinged by the fireball that was created.
Well, it's interesting that you consider this a valid argument, right, against. And if you can't understand how paper could survive a fireball, I don't know what else to tell you. Now, if the passport was made out of, like, say, lead, you probably would have a point, but it's paper. You know, one of the things that you saw at Ground Zero was millions of items of paper coming out of the World Trade Center, especially out of the impact point. Well, why wasn't the paper destroyed? We do have human remains that were found at Lower Manhattan. This is evident in the EMT and FDNY reports given to the oral historical offices that were conducted in October, November, and December of 2001, where they testified to seeing ID cards, singed human remains such as legs and hands, which were later identified to passengers of Flight 11 and 175. The coroner in New York basically got some of the family's DNA to match with human remains that were found at the site. If you're going to say that all of this was facilitated or manipulated, well, guess what? You don't just have the convenience of saying it, you have to prove it. And if you're saying it because it sounds, oh, well, that's against the official narrative, it sounds just as plausible. Well, no, I'm sorry. I'm going to need more than that. You know, if you're going to get other people to believe in what you just say, well, then you're in no good position than, say, the federal government, because a lot of people don't believe what they say. So in somewhere in between is the truth. And if you, now that passport belonged to Satam al-Saskami, who was sitting in seat 9B of American Airlines Flight 11, was the passport in his pocket. Could have been blown out by the force of the blast, which is basically a G-force. I mean, we saw an engine survive on Church Street. Damaged, but yeah. And by the way, if you're going to say that passport was planted, why would they allow a profile of somebody from Saudi Arabia to be on it? I mean, wouldn't it be more plausible to the American government's narrative to have an Iraqi passport rather than a Saudi one, if we're going to look into the profiles of some of these people? Because that's exactly what the FBI did, and found out that a number of these hijackers came from Saudi Arabia, especially the muscle hijackers. Wouldn't it have been better to just make a profile, or, you know, facilitate one that some people actually claim to believe, that government could just make people up without people investigating who they are? Well, Satam al-Saskami was a real person. He's from Riyadh, and his passport survived. And we went to war with Iraq, not with Saudi Arabia. So it would help the government narrative to blame Iraq for 9/11, which they tried to do anyway. And they tried to do that with the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, as well as the Murrah building bombing in Oklahoma in 1995. Tried to blame Iraq then. I mean, they're trying to blame Iraq for as far back as the late 1980s. So, I mean, if you're going to believe that the passport is planted, well, why not just say that Satam al-Saskami, or make a profile, say, hey, listen, you know, let's make a dead profile, a person who died, who's like a nondescript actor and a nondescript person in Iraq, basically say it belongs to him. But no, they actually left a real person from Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and they left it on the street. That's what you believe, instead of just believing that the passport could survive. You know, in Flight 93, ID cards actually survived the people on the plane. Are those planted too? For what?
Another passport and a red bandana. Some people said the hijackers were wearing red bandanas, were found at the crash site of United 93, although none of the plane is visible at the site. According to the official theory, the plane was coming down 580 miles an hour at a steep angle and went into the soft soil of Pennsylvania so hard and so fast it went completely underground. And yet somehow there must have been an open window, the bandana and the passport.
See, this is what I don't get, right? You know, you say that this is, let's get empirical, yet you're providing a very fallacious and very silly theory. And I hate to use that term because, you know, you're not a dumb person. I think you're highly intelligent. You're a respected theologian for years. People talk about your work, but yet here, why do you go this route? And, you know, that Rothschild quote is now coming back to haunt you, because, you know, why would you go down this fringe conspiracy route? You know, I see you don't mention to the crowd that they found the ID card of CeCe Lyles, a flight attendant of Flight 93. They found an ID card belonging to a cab driver in Florida. I forgot his name, but they found the ID card. Now, were those planted too? What about the people who in Somerset County who witnessed the plane crashing right into the ground in Shanksville? People like Eric Peterson, Paula Pluta, Kelly Levernight. Remember, they're lying too. Yeah, we have evidence the plane crash, Flight 93 crashed in Shanksville. And the analytical, the physical data. Now, I'll chalk this up as saying that you're ignorant regarding intentional crash sites, because they're very rare to begin with. And, you know, there's very few examples like PSA 1771, which predated 9/11, which basically crashed to the ground at the speed of sound over 700 miles an hour. That's for the people who say, well, these planes can't go past their max limit. Yes, they can. They can. And if you look at PSA 1771 and G.J. Thurman's detonator, basically showed that this is similar to Shanksville, because there was no large piece of the plane. There were no hull bodies. Nothing survived. You're not going to, especially for Flight 93, when there's 78,000 pounds of fuel going at 560 miles an hour. This is what I don't get about these people, is that they think that it's going to be, a human body can survive that.
Jumped out.
Yeah, light objects like a bandana, like a passport, can't survive. Flight 93 was carrying, I think, 50,000 pounds of mail as well. And that some of that artifacts, plane is made out of nylon, fiberglass, light objects. And we saw the ensuing explosion right into the air, miles into the air. That's how some of the debris landed at Indian Lake in New Baltimore. They found pieces of the engine, most of it near the crash impact. You're not going to find most of the plane because the plane basically does vaporize. Take a look at the recent plane explosion in China. There's no whole piece of the plane there.
Moreover, the incriminating evidence in Muhammad Atta's alleged luggage contained his will. Now, if you were going to fly a plane into the World Trade Center, would you take your will?
Well, he left his will in this hotel room too. He left a will at Germany when he signed it, and back in, I think it was 1997, where he made a will in front of Munir al-Muntasek, who was a member of the Hamburg cell, but wasn't involved with the 9/11 attacks. The FBI actually investigated him, and the courts found him not guilty. Okay, is it strange to bring a will onto luggage? Probably, but they made a preparation will for all of the hijackers for the night before, that they had to shave their bodies because their bodies and their souls can't have impurities or hair. They had to wear tunics, perfumes, so they could smell good, which is, I know it's silly, but it's not like these were pious Muslims to begin with. They're members of a radical faith called Wahhabism. And like I said, I'm not going to get into this here, but it's not Islamic at all. Sunni theologians have spoke out against Wahhabism, which gave us some of the worst terrorist groups in mankind history. Al-Qaeda, the Islamic State, Abu Sayyaf, Jamaat Islamiyah, Jabhat al-Nusra, Dar es-Salaam, Dar es-Sham, Boko Haram. Yeah, I could name dozens more. So, yeah, I mean, to think that these were actually religious people, God, they're not. They're perfect for things like this, because they didn't attack us because our women wear short skirts. Why did they attack the United States? Because of our foreign policy. That's not what Bush said. That's not what Condoleezza Rice said. That's not what Colin Powell said. That's not what George Tenet said. Why? Because if they said that they attacked us because of our foreign policy toward Israel, toward Saudi Arabia, that means the public will start turning their eye and their ear toward, hey, why are they attacking us regarding our foreign policy? What needs to be changed? Ramzi Youssef, before he was sentenced for his participation in the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, in 1995, basically told the courts, he was given a chance to speak. It was almost an hour long, and he gave a speech. Not once did he mention Islam as a religion. He mentioned that he attacked the United States because of our foreign policy and because of our persistent war with the Islamic world in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Afghanistan, and later on in Libya, in Syria, in Sudan, and Pakistan, and the looming war with Iran. Sanctions are considered an act of war. God, how many sanctions do we have out in the open? So will Griffin mention this? No. Will any of the fringe movement within the 9/11 movement the fringe conspiracy theorists talk about these issues? I mean, yeah, if you say Jew, Jew, Jew enough times, yeah, maybe they will.
I'm unfortunately not making this stuff up.
Yeah, you are actually. Yes, you are. You personally aren't. You're just repeating stuff that other people made stuff up. Like Barbara Honecker, for example. Thierry Mason is another example. Dave Von Kleist. These people predate you. Okay. And later on, Rebecca Roth, Judy Wood, Christopher Bolin.
Moreover, the 9/11 Commission, in defending the official conspiracy theory, portrayed Atta and the others as devout Muslims, ready to meet their maker. But real truth seekers, getting empirical, have pointed out that Atta and several other of the alleged hijackers loved gambling, cocaine, alcohol, pork, and lap dances.
And again, okay, the 9/11 Commission report is wrong, and so are you, right? Because you will have a very lacking understanding of Wahhabism. Like I said, they're not Islamic. And according to Wahhabi Muslims, that what these guys are doing are basically trying to fit in with the Western lifestyle, trying to fit in with the kuffar, the crusaders. That's what they call the United States. The Yahud in Arabic, which meant is Israel. And they're trying to fit in so they can easily conduct operations. Now, according to, take this with a grain of salt, according to the testimonies of Ramzi bin Al-Shib and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, this is exactly what they were chosen for. Members of the Hamburg cell, Muhammad Atta, Marwan al-Shei, Ziad Jarrah. And Ramzi bin Al-Shib was supposed to be part of that. He was selected as a pilot, but he couldn't get into the country. Khalid al-Midar and Nawaf al-Hazmi, they were selected as pilots, but they couldn't speak English, and they needed to speak English to be a pilot. So they basically became part of the hijacking team of 77. But they were supposed to fit in. It's called taqiyya. Now, taqiyya is a misused word by Wahhabis. Taqiyya is used in war. Now, the Wahhabis think that they are in a war with the United States. Who conducted that war? Bin Laden. Does the Islamic world consider Bin Laden a religious authority? Hell no. No way. But the 9/11 Commission report will state that they are. And you fell for it. You basically said, no, the 9/11 Commission report are lying. These people can't be pious Muslims. Well, guess what? You're half right. They aren't. But the reason why they started drinking and eating pork was to fit in. And these guys really believed they were pious Muslims, but they're not.
These facts were even reported in the Wall Street Journal. And yet the 9/11 Commission, in spite of its professed love for facts, said it had no idea why these men often went to Las Vegas.
Yeah, but that's coming from the FBI as well. They don't know why they went there. Did they go there to gamble? I lived in Vegas for 10 years. It's always considered a terrorist hotspot. In fact, in the year 2000, it was reported by the FBI and the Las Vegas Review-Journal that there was an attack supposed to happen at the Stratosphere, the casino, which is this long casino way up. They built the roller coaster on the top. The first day they opened the roller coaster, got stuck with people on it. And I think that thing is like 200 feet in the air or something like that. God, I could be off by the height, but still, it's a big, big casino, a little tall. But yeah, that was a hot spot for a terrorist act. But because they considered Las Vegas haram, which is sinful, because a lot of Arabs and Muslims like to go there, especially Saudis. They love to gamble, and it's very hot there, so they love going there.
Another stunning discovery occurred when one member of the 9/11 Truth movement decided to get empirical about an especially puzzling matter. The fact that the FBI's website on Osama bin Laden as a most wanted terrorist said nothing about 9/11. It mentioned other terrorist acts for which he was wanted, but nothing about 9/11.
Because at the time, while those posters went out, they were still trying to collect information about bin Laden. Now, this is before the Zacarias Moussaoui trial of 2006. After that trial, they had evidence showing that bin Laden indeed was part of the attacks. He didn't create the operation. Now, again, take this grain of salt, that came from Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. I believe that. I believe that that operation came from him because he was involved with a prior operation called the Pachinko plot with his nephew, Ramza Youssef, the suspect of the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. The Pachinko plot was an international bombing plot of 12 American airliners flying over the Pacific and exploding with Timex bombs that would be hidden in the planes, under the fuel tanks, under the seats of the planes, 1 minute apart from each other. And it was a multi-phase attack. It was a multi-plot. Now, one of the plotters, Abdul Hakim Murad, was captured in the Philippines, and he was interrogated by the authorities there, and he told them about another hidden plot, that there were sleeper cells inside the United States training at flight schools where they were going to hijack 10 planes and crash them into, like, the Sears Tower, a nuclear facility, the World Trade Center, Pentagon, the Golden Gate Bridge, the Brooklyn Bridge, so forth, White House. And so this operation, 9/11 operation, was devised from that. And that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was approached bin Laden about the idea to hijack 10 planes. Like I said, take that with a grain of salt. The Pachinko plot really existed, but did Khalid Sheikh Mohammed go and meet with bin Laden and propose 10 planes? Very well could be. But bin Laden said no, and then he'd think about it. And then in 1998, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed visited bin Laden again, and he agreed to the operation, but only 4 planes. Now, would David Ray Griffin bring up the fact of maybe additional hijackings on 9/11, like United Airlines Flight 23? No. Does he even know about it? Probably no. Hardly anyone does.
Ed Haas, who writes the...
All right, who was on Flight 23, right? Were they Al-Qaeda? Doesn't have to be. So that means that somebody was listening to the operation and they manipulated the operation to involve more planes. Where would they get these people from? Well, I just did a video about 3 Qatari men who were supposed to hijack, who were inside the United States in Washington, D.C., who was supposed to fly on American Airlines, I think, 1441 on September 10th, but they never got on a plane. Well, why is that important? Because that flight that they were supposed to be on later became American Airlines Flight 77. The FBI dropped the issue and said that they weren't involved with 9/11 and that, this was a false lead. Meanwhile, the hotel they were staying in, one of the room attendants basically saw pilots' uniforms, laptops hooked up with cell phones, manuals on how to fly planes, and knives. Coincidence? Think Dave Rigger's going to bring that up? No.
Muckraker report, which you can read on the internet, contacted Rex Toom, the chief of investigative publicity for the FBI, and asked why not. Toom replied, "The reason why 9/11 is not mentioned on Osama bin Laden's most wanted page is because the FBI has no hard evidence connecting bin Laden to 9/11.
That's right. And that's not the whole quote either. Basically, that was right at the time because the evidence was classified. It was declassified after the Zacarias Moussaoui trial of 2006. You think the FBI is basically going to tell the world, especially muckraker, what evidence they had against bin Laden? While they were still trying to get Al-Qaeda operatives to speak? But you could blame the CIA for doing that because they tortured the living hell out of them. And they confessed to anything, which basically ruined an investigation. That's why we don't have a trial. But Griffin's not going to mention that. Of course not, because it doesn't fit with the narrative of his alternative theories, which have to be in opposition to the official narrative.
The 9/11 Commission.
Think about it. Why would the FBI basically say or give the information to some nobody at the muckraker? The hell is he?
Could have made this discovery. Many months before the 9/11 Commission report appeared, the Family Steering Committee for the 9/11 Commission, comprised of relatives of the victims, asked the Commission to explain why bin Laden's profile on the FBI's Most Wanted Fugitives poster does not include the 9/11 attacks. However, the fact-loving 9/11 Commission, besides not answering this question, did not even reveal this fact to the American people.
And as well as not answering 90, I think it was 90% of the questions of the steering committee either. And that's why Laurie Van Auken and Karen Bertweiser and all the rest of them basically grew disillusioned. And then the fringe conspiracy started propagating no planes, no hijackers. They basically threw their hands up in the air and said, we don't want nothing to do with this anymore. And they interviewed these poor women later and basically said that they'd grown disillusioned with 9/11 in general because the government wasn't telling the truth. They weren't ever going to tell the truth. And do you think people like Ray Griffin's telling the truth at this point? That's who represented the truth movement after the victims' families.
Another issue is why, assuming the truth of the story that the planes were hijacked, the U.S. military failed to intercept them before they could strike their targets. The official story is that it was the FAA's fault. For the first 3 years, the military claimed that although the FAA did notify it about all 4 flights, these notifications came too late. But the 9/11 truth movement, getting empirical, showed that even if the FAA had been as slow as the military claimed, there still would have been time for the interceptions to be made. These things can happen very quickly.
Yeah, this part I can agree with. Okay, they could have responded quickly because after 175 crashed in the South Tower, intercept jets actually arrived in New York City. I think it was like less than 8 minutes later, or just right inside 5 to 8 minutes.
This empirical research supported the idea that there had been a stand-down order.
But then again, I mean, Griffin's not going to bring this up either. During the 1990s, and I think in 2001, Don Rumsfeld actually downsized the size of the defense capabilities of the United States in regards to, I think, the NORAD, because the Cold War was over, and they basically didn't need all those planes to, defend from the ocean shores. And when you think about it, that's really true. I mean, how many countries are basically going to invade the United States, especially in the age of nuclear devices? So, this ain't Russian or Soviet vogues like Red Dawn, where they got to land inside the United States using it, jets and airplanes on the shores of like California or Montana or something, and basically invade the United States. It's just not reasonable. So that's the reason why they didn't need a lot of these defense jets. But on top of that, the FAA basically was more than willing to not share information with NORAD. For whatever reason that is, I don't know whether it's incompetence, malfeasance. I think it's a little bit of both. But did anybody get fired of it? No. The only person who got fired regarding 9/11 was Frank Argenbright, who is the head of Argenbright Security, which basically was security in Logan and Dulles.
Order canceling standard procedures. However, in the summer of 2004, perhaps in response to these findings, the 9/11 Commission, in producing its report, came up with a radically new story, saying that the FAA, after notifying the military about the first flight only 9 minutes before it crashed into the North Tower, did not notify it about the other 3 flights at all until after they had already crashed. This new story was popularized by Michael Bronner in a Vanity Fair article called 9/11, the NORAD Tapes,
You should read that article.
to which I devote the first chapter of my book. The tapes in question were used by the 9/11 Commission to construct its new story. The military later gave these tapes to Bronner, who, as one of the producers of the film United 93, had proven that he would faithfully support the official line. The fact that
But that he went by the evidence. So, hey, at least he has evidence for his stance. You don't. I mean, you're just basically saying that alleged hijackers, alleged planes. Well, I don't care about alleged. I want to know something. I don't want to believe something. I want to know something, right? I want tangible, something I could hold in my hand, something I could go to court with. You know, I don't want speculation. I don't want unproven alternative theories.
Hunter was singled out by the military to receive.
That's the reason why Ray Griffin's not in court. That's the reason why no truth movement's in court right now. They're trying to be heard. 21 years. The hell are you waiting for?
These tapes means that his article can be considered a semi-official report. And Bronner surely did what the military had hoped, claiming that these tapes present the authentic military history of 9/11. But there are many reasons to doubt this claim.
Give me one.
Let's take the claim that the FAA's air traffic controllers did not contact the military about the first flight, American Flight 11, until 8:38, only 9 minutes before it hit the tower. This would have been 24 minutes after the controller had seen the first sign of trouble, and 13 minutes after they knew that the plane appeared to be hijacked. There are many reasons to doubt this account. One of these involves discoveries I made while writing 9/11, debunking 9/11 debunking. Generally, I simply report other people's discoveries, but this time I did a little empirical work myself.
Yeah.
This work involved extended email conversations with 2 air traffic controllers who have worked at FAA's Boston Center, which was in charge of Flight 11 when its troubles developed. Robin Horden, who worked there until 1981 and now lives in the Seattle area, and Colin Scoggins, who was and still is the military expert at Boston Center. Because of the information provided to me by these 2 men, we now have a much stronger evidence than we had before, which was pretty strong, that the official story about American Flight 11 is false. Although Scoggins did not himself say this, the information that he provided shows that his phone call to the military, to NORADs, must have occurred at about 8:29, not 8:38, as the official.
Well, see, now this is where you got to listen to words, right? Must have. So he's not sure. Okay, that's one. 2, he didn't provide this information. That's coming from your own words. And this is the problem. You know, you can't just make up or speculate and say this actually fits, right? I'm sorry, it's disingenuous at best. It really is.
Claims. This would mean that the military had 18 minutes, not merely 9 minutes, to intercept Flight 11 before it got to Manhattan. Plenty of time, given the fact that such interceptions are usually made within 10 minutes. Horden's information shows, moreover, that the military must have been contacted even earlier, shortly after 8:20, when the transponder signal was lost and the plane went radically off course, as well as already having lost radio contact.
Yeah, even though that the transponder was turned off, even there was no radio contact, there's still radar contact. And if the person doesn't move from his screen and sees the blip, he could still track American Airlines 11.
This means that the military would have had over 25 minutes to make the interception. We have, therefore, very strong evidence that the military had been given a stand-down order, canceling.
What evidence do you have they were given a stand-down order by then, right? You don't. You just, I don't know where you got that from, right? That there was no stand-down order given. It's assumed that Cheney did. It's assumed, but there was no intercept jets nearby Washington, D.C. They weren't going to intercept 77 in time. even though that was in the air the longest regarding the news media. I mean, that was, I think it was 30 minutes before it even hit the Pentagon, where it was announced that the FAA considered it a hijack. That would be your only argument for like how NORAD could have intercepted that jet. But with 11, no way. They couldn't have known. Now, they only heard the recording by Mohammed Atta, where they said, we have some planes. Please sit down. We're returning to the airport. He made 2 recordings, 2 voice calls inside the plane, which he thought was going it was made to the Boston call center instead of in the plane, because he thought he was talking inside the plane.
Standard procedures. This is only one of many examples in my book showing that if we get empirical, we can see that the tapes do not provide the authentic military history.
No, you're going by information that was provided, not directly by them, and then you speculated on that information. I mean, come on, man, that's not empirical.
History of 9/11. They have been doctored.
What is your evidence? They're doctored. See, you can't just say they're doctored and basically just walk away from that. That's a remarkable claim. What evidence you have they're doctored? What evidence? That's empirical. That's what the definition of empiricism means. To show physical evidence of your statements. What you're doing is highly speculating, wildly speculating.
Another claim made by the 9/11 Commission, then repeated by Bronner, is that there were only 2 bases in the northeast sector of the United States with fighter jets on alert: Otis Air National Guard Base in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, and Langley Air Force Base in Langley, Virginia. Bronner, on the basis of this claim, says, referring to Colonel Robert Marr, the head of NEADS, incredibly, Marr has only 4 armed fighters at his disposal to defend about a quarter of the continental United States. Although this claim truly is incredible in the literal sense of the term, Bronner uses it along with the 9/11 Commission to explain why fighters were not immediately put over New York City to protect it, and why fighters to protect Washington, D.C. had to come all the way up from Langley. However, if Bronner and the Commission, while interviewing Scoggins, had asked him about this, he could have told them what he told me, that although it is technically correct that Otis and Langley are the only bases in that part of the United States that are designated as alert bases, this does not mean that they are the only bases from which NEADS could have drawn fighters. There were ready fighters in Atlantic City, New Jersey, Toledo, Ohio, Syracuse, New York, Burlington, Vermont, and Selfridge, Michigan, as well as Andrews Air Force Base right next to Washington, D.C., on which NEADS could have called. Once again, if we get empirical about 9/11, the official story disintegrates. Popular Mechanics makes an even more outlandish claim about alert fighters, alleging that after the end of the Cold War, the United States did not keep any armed fighters on alert. They support this claim with a statement by former Republican Senator Warren Rudman, who was quoted in a Boston Globe article as saying, "We don't have capable fighter aircraft loaded with missiles sitting on runways in this country. We just don't do that anymore. To expect American fighter aircraft to intercept commercial airliners is totally unrealistic." This quotation comes at the conclusion of Popular Mechanics' section on interceptions, in which it argued that the military's failure to intercept the airlines does not mean that there had been a stand-down order. This quotation was evidently intended as the knockout punch. However, if one actually reads the Boston Globe article, one finds that it does not conclude with that quotation from Rudman. Instead, the writer follows it by saying, "Otis offers something close to that posture, however. Its 102nd Fighter Wing is equipped with 2 armed and fueled aircraft ready to fly around the clock each day of the year." So much for popular mechanics.
Oh, so much for you not understanding what a shoot down order consists of. Now, this is coming from the military chain of command who can authorize the military to shoot down civilian aircraft. It's the president, it's the Secretary of Defense, and then NORAD, if the first two are not operating. Okay. Now, who is in chain command in the United States on 9/11? Was it the president? Well, he's in Air Force One. He can't land anywhere. Was it the Secretary of Defense? Well, when the Pentagon had hit, he was outside, not at the presidential executive office, where all the leading members of the National Security Council are at under an exigent time events of time. We're under attack. We were under attack after 175 crashed into the South Tower. Rumsfeld's not there. Who's in charge of the country? Who's in the PIOC? The Vice President, Secretary of State, NORAD. Okay. What's the problem here? Well, the problem here is not being brought up by you. If Dick Cheney's running the country, he's breaking the military chain of command. He can authorize a shoot down and stand down order against the Constitution, against the military chain of command authority. He's directing NORAD. Is he telling them not to intercept these jets? Who knows? Is that the reason why Ralph Eberhard, Larry Arnold, Richard Myers gave a false timeline to 9/11 Commission? Probably so. But it's speculation. Reasonable. Is Ray Griffin going to be talking about this? No. He'll just basically say that all the NORAD's a bunch of liars, and that's how they do things. To him, it's a black and white world. He's no more right than the federal government story. In fact, the federal government story makes a little bit more sense because, according to Ray Griffin, all the 9/11 Commission, all of the Joint House Inquiry, all the FBI, the NSA, they're all liars. And that the official story of plane hijackings is false. And later on, it probably is going to be talking about living hijackers and fake phone calls. It's irrational.
Knockout punch, and its honesty. What was true at Otis, incidentally, was true of other alert bases around the country. For example, Captain Tom Pickle Herring, a pilot at Homestead Air Reserve Base near Miami, was quoted in 1999 as saying, "We have weapons on our jets. We need to be postured such that no one would dare threaten us. If needed, we could be killing things in 5 minutes or less."
They have to get shoot down authority from the president to do that. They can't do that on their own. And unless the president and unless Rumsfeld are disposed, which is why they do continuity of government drills that Cheney took part of decades prior to 9/11 with people like Richard Clark and Donald Rumsfeld, then NORAD can make that decision.
What he means is from scramble order to being up several thousand feet in the air, going after other planes, 5 minutes or less. As this and many other examples show, the subtitle of the Popular Mechanics book needs to be expanded to read, "How Conspiracy Theories Cannot Stand Up to the Facts If We Are Allowed to Determine What the Facts Are."
Well, I mean, that quote is true. I mean, take a look at it. You don't even know the proper protocol of a shoot down order. You think that defense jets could basically go in the air and shoot down any opposing aircraft. I mean, there's regulations and mandates to follow through, orders. First, they have to get orders for the plane to be ejected into the air. Then they have to get authority from their chain of command within whatever sector of military they're in, whether it's the Air Force or the Army or the National Guard. They have to get authorization to load those planes with weapons. And then their chain of command, their superiors, have to get authority from NORAD whether it's Larry Arnold or Ralph Eberhard or Richard Myers. They have to get that, or Kevin Espaney. They have to get, and even Espaney has to get authorization. They have to get authorization for a shoot down. And that has to come from the military chain of command, which I just told you. It doesn't happen like that.
Another question that can be answered responsibly only on the basis of an empirical investigation of the facts is why 3 buildings of the World Trade Center collapsed after 2 of them were struck.
Right off, first of all, I feel like fast forwarding this because one, I'm not a physics major, okay? I don't claim to be one. And my opinions regarding how the towers fell are irrelevant because this is not an area I study. I study geopolitics, the intelligence services, radical fundamentalism, stuff like that, Middle East culture, US imperialism, Israeli and Saudi influence using their lobbies in the United States, some like all these, right? But like the World Trade Center 1, 2, and 7, I am less than a novice. Now, I've interviewed David Chandler, I've interviewed Ross Muir, I've interviewed Wayne Costi, I've listened to them, and I would suggest you go listen to them. And also listen to NIST. And then you make a decision using the scientific method, because that's what will tell you the truth. Okay? You take the information from both sides, you test their hypothesis, and you see what is true and what is not. And for me, it just takes way too much time. And geopolitics is much more expansive and much more harder to understand. It's so lengthy that I'm still learning from it 12 years later, 13 years later. So to put this in there is like to give me, a headache that I don't need. I'm getting a headache with, people making these irrational theories. So yeah, I think it would do me no good to make a decision about what I think happened in the buildings and stuff like that. And it would be disingenuous of me to opine about this. So I'm going to fast forward this. I spoke a lot anyway. So, okay, we'll stop from here. But it would be disingenuous of me to basically offer an opinion. Because I don't want you to have an opinion. I don't want you to believe, right? I want you to know something. In each of these videos I do, I want you to write down the things that I say in the hopes that you research what I say and see if it's right. Okay. And I want you to come away with knowledge, not with belief, not with speculation. There could be some things that you never heard of before and say, hey, wait a minute, that's interesting. Let me write that down, see if he's right. And I'll put my reputation on the line. I use my real name. I use my face to just about everything I say. And if I'm wrong, I want to hear about it. I want to hear about it because I don't want to keep repeating something that I'm wrong and try to misinform my audience. That's not what I'm about.
To get hotter. Indeed, over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit hotter.
Let me go a little bit.
Flight 77 under the control of Hani Hanjour. I'm now asking the question, what caused the damage to Wedge 1 of the Pentagon? However, Hani Hanjour was known to be a terrible pilot, so bad that he could not safely fly a single-engine airplane.
It's not necessarily true. So right off the bat, he doesn't realize that he did fly a Cessna plane. In fact, the Piper II plane in Washington, D.C., Virginia, he actually did. Yeah, I think he was taking somebody on a plane and they were flying over a river and stuff like that. He could fly. Now, when it came to commercial airline jets, people just make, the stuff that, oh, you have to be an expert to fly these planes. No, you don't. And basically, they recreated the flight path of Flight 77 because the flight data recorder survived. So they got the analytical data survived from it. And they recreate this in like amateur, these like Boeing training modules where you have these amateur pilots, and they're on YouTube, right? And, you barely are flying the plane. Like, you're just no stressful positions. All you have to do is basically take off, get it in the air, get it on autopilot. And then when you're nearing your target, you turn off autopilot and you steer the plane. And you're basically barely moving the steering wheel. It's like driving a car. It's not that hard to drive a car. Is a plane different? Very. But it's not that hard to fly a plane into a big building like the Pentagon. Now, I don't know where they get these ideas from, but they listen to the wrong people, especially pilots for 9/11 Truth. By the way, there's like 4 people who are pilots who basically espouse fringe conspiracies, and they treat them as gospel, these people. Russ Wittenberg, and I think Kolstad, or whatever his name is. God's sakes. And in the light of tens of thousands of pilots, including the largest airline union, the AIA. And they're not going to believe them because, they're either told to shut up. That's not true. I mean, there's been pilots who have been retired for a long time, the last 20 years. Why don't you interview them? You never do. You interview only the pilots, and there's so few of them that cater to fringe conspiracies. Why is that? Because you will never interview the tens of thousands of pilots out there who will tell you the truth, who will oppose your narratives, your alternative theories. You'll just call them shills, or you'll just say, they were probably threatened. You'll make some excuse on it.
Instructors would not go up with him a second time saying, "You're too..."
Honey Hunter doesn't need to be an expert pilot to crash a plane. There's another thing. You have to be an expert to crash. Who says that? There was no impossible turn. 175, he almost missed the building. He almost crashed into 2 planes while crashing into 175, into the South Tower, North Tower. I'm sorry, the South Tower. He almost crashed into 2 other planes.
Dangerous. And yet, in order to hit wedge 1, according to the official story, he had to perform an amazing feat in his hijacked airliner, bring it down 8,000 feet in a 330-degree downward spiral in under 4 minutes, then bring it in at ground level without even scraping the lawn.
But the lawn isn't ground level, like the plane wasn't scraping ground level. You ever see a plane where it's trying to land is just a few feet above ground? That's exactly what happened here at the Pentagon. And you claim that this is impossible. Well, you're not a pilot. I don't care what you believe.
Getting empirical about this claim would simply mean asking some experienced airline pilots
Like who?
if this was possible. Russ Wittenberg.
Yeah, pilots for 9/11 Truth. Of course, you're not going to interview anybody from American Airlines or United, right? You're going to interview these people.
One of the many pilots who belong.
And what does that tell you, right? If you're an honest researcher, you're going to ask people like Russ Wittenberg, and then you're going to ask people from American United Airlines who are not affiliated with fringe conspiracy theories, because pilots for 9/11 Truth, much like you, Mr. Griffin, you basically said 9/11 is an inside job right off the bat, right? Without even investigating why it was a 9/11, why it was an inside job to begin with. You just asserted that it's an inside job. You already have a biased worldview regarding the event itself. So you're going to interview who? Well, I'm going to listen to the words and interview people who agree with my narrative, which would mean that you're not an honest independent investigator. Because if you were honest independent investigator, you would have went to American Airlines and United Airlines and say, hey, is it possible that Hani Hanjour could have crashed that plane into the Pentagon near ground level? You didn't do that. No, what did you do? You're using the words of pilots for 9/11 Truth to state your claim. How many pilots are left on that group? 5, 4 or 5. Raul Balsamo, the late Raul Balsamo, he passed away. He's the creator of the group. This is misleading your audience.
Belong to the 9/11 Truth movement, says that he in spite of his 35 years of experience flying commercial airliners, could not have done it.
Yeah, right. Has he ever tried? Really, that's a disingenuous statement. So he's actually conducted an operation. He's actually flew a plane where he did a 380-degree nautical turn and crashed into the Pentagon. I mean, use your head. Use your head. No, of course he couldn't replicate what was done. It's never been done before.
For an amateur who couldn't even fly a Cessna to maneuver the jetliner in such a highly professional manner.
When did crashing a plane require a professional manner? No professional would. It is unprofessional, to be honest with you, to intentionally crash a plane into a building. What is this? A profession, a highly professional manner. You have to be an expert to crash a plane. Name me a professional pilot that intentionally crashed a plane. What is with these people? I didn't know you had to be such an expert to crash a plane. Never this is why I mentioned before previously. I never seen so much of a backlash about hijacking of planes and crashing into targets. Any other event in history where there was hijacked planes, yeah, those were legitimate. Just on September 11th, there's no way. Arabs basically are all of a sudden dumb. They can't do this. Well, I would say that's pretty racist, wouldn't you?
Adds would have been totally impossible. Ralph Oman.
Yeah, right. It's totally impossible to recreate that. Totally impossible. So Wittenberg would be right about that because he'd be dead.
Holt, a former 757 pilot, agrees, saying the idea that an unskilled pilot could have flown this trajectory is simply too ridiculous to consider.
Funny, because amateur pilots have replicated this turn, and like I said, it's on YouTube. And you could barely see like the wheel, the steering wheel. You basically move it. Yeah, it's like it's not even hard to like turn. And I think my co-researcher DJ thru-ought, he posted a video where you can see like the turn of the wheel, and he's basically barely moving it. Impossible turn. He's only repeating what he was been told by pilots for 9/11 Truth. There's the real horror. Because if he interviewed like the AIA, American Airlines, United Airlines, hell, JetBlue. Ask any other pilot outside of the 9/11 movement. And you know what they'll tell you? That, yeah, they could have done it. You know who said that? The trainer who trained Hani Hanjour. He said that in an article.
How did Popular Mechanics deal with this problem? It ignored it.
Why did they ignore it? Because they're not professionals in the airline industry. Wow. That would be honest of them to not offer their opinions on something they're not experienced in. Unlike you, Mr. Griffin, unlike you, Barbara Honecker, unlike you, Pilots for 9/11 Truth, and every single body who posits fringe conspiracies, because you automatically assume the impossible, the irrational to be more realistic, more reasonable than the official narrative. Who has the problem?
Although its authors like to tell us how many experts they consulted, they do not report asking any airline pilots if Hanjour could have flown this trajectory. Indeed, they do not even mention this trajectory. They refer to this part of the alleged flight of American 77 only in passing. That is, after arguing that although Hanjour had never flown an airliner and was a terrible pilot, he was able to get this plane back to Washington by simply putting it on autopilot. And then they add, he steered the plane manually for only the final 8 minutes of the flight. For only the final 8 minutes when the impossible was done.
What was impossible about it? What is impossible about crashing a plane to a building? This is what the truth movement should be asking. What's impossible about it? What's impossible about landing a plane into a building like the Pentagon? You see how wide it is? It's not very hard. I don't get this line of thinking. It's like very cultish, if you ask me. Like you have to believe, and you have to jump through so many hoops to believe it. And you move the goalposts here and there to make it sense because you can't accept the simple fact that, hey, planes were hijacked by Arab fundamentalists. Oh, if I believe that, that's agreeing with the government narrative, while not realizing that the information regarding why they hijacked these planes in the first place successfully and why they crashed them successfully in the first place, and the backgrounds provided thereof of each people with these plane crashings goes unnoticed by who? The truth movement. Because if you don't believe in hijackers, you won't care to study the intelligence apparatuses who were involved in monitoring these people. What information did they collect about these people? Did they know they were talking about these operations beforehand? And is that the reason why there were no defense jets intercepting these planes? That there was no FBI agents monitoring these people because they had no idea they were inside the country? That information was intentionally withheld from them? But you're not going to ask these questions if you don't believe in hijackers. So you're left right where you are now, in a state of disbelief.
Popular Mechanics claims that it has shown all the key claims of the 9/11 truth movement to be mistaken. One of the movement's central claims, however, is that whatever damaged the Pentagon, it could not have been Flight 77 under the control of Hani Hanjour. Popular Mechanics does not even try to refute this claim, perhaps hope.
Why should they even admit your claims in the first place? Why should they even address it? I mean, your own words go against you. Any novice can see that. Over 86 people identified the plane as an American Airlines plane. I have made videos ad nauseum about this. And yet all these eyewitnesses are not even taken with an ounce of sincerity by people like you or Loose Change or Barbara Honegger or Citizens Investigation Team. In fact, CIT basically goes out of their way to denigrate those eyewitnesses. And say instead, they didn't see a plane crash the building, that a plane flew over the Pentagon. This is who you support. This is who you align with. This video is not for skeptics. It's not for debunkers. It's for you in the truth movement, because I want you to realize that, yes, not everything the government told us is the truth. Not everything is a lie either. We have to know the information which was intentionally withheld from whoever. Now, some of that information is public now, but we got to know why. But we can't know why if we don't have any operatives or players involved.
That most of its readers will not notice. There has been much controversy within the 9/11 movement itself as to exactly what happened at the Pentagon. But on this point, there is absolute unanimity. Even those who believe that it was a Boeing 757 may even believe that it was Flight 77, say, but of course, it couldn't have been under the control of Hani Hanjour. So we've got absolute unanimity on that point.
Yeah, by you, a small select fringe group, which is now smaller than from when you made this lecture in 2007. In fact, it's broken. I mean, back then in your lecture, 2007, Truth Movement was going strong. You got everybody on your side, Alex Jones, Jim Fetzer. Yeah, the real luminaries, right? The real luminaries, the people that you didn't need. Who did you need? Paul Thompson, Kevin Fenton, John Gold, Ryan Dawson, James Corbett, Ray Nowolski, Robbie Martin, Abby Martin. No, you push these guys to the side. and said, no, we'll give credence to pilots for 9/11 Truth. Jason Burmis, Barbara Honegger, Christopher Bolin. Now look at you. You're a laughing stock. And you know what it is? You're not even a laughing stock anymore. You're dying. And it's a slow, unabated pulse. Like the end of an orchestra. One note every 30 seconds. One note. That's you. Barely surviving. Barely. Why is that? That's the question you need to ask. Why? 15 years later, David Ray Griffin, no longer active anymore. He's older now, much older. But he hasn't talked about 9/11 in years. Christopher Bolin, dead in the water. Rebecca Roth, dead in the water. CIT, long forgotten. Pilots for 9/11 Truth, long forgotten. Why? If they had so much incriminating evidence of all these conspiracies, why are they dead in the water? And yet, you know who's not dead in the water? DJ Thermal Detonator. Ryan Dawson, well, he's being banned everywhere. James Corbett, getting banned everywhere. They're still active, though. Ray Nowinski, here and there. But Paul Thompson, John Gold, those guys got fed up. Fed up by who? The government? Not just the government, but by you people. The fringe conspiracy movement. And when I say you people, I'm not talking about the victims of people who follow Griffin, who follow Burmis. I don't blame you at all. I think you're victimizing these people. What I'm trying to do is get you out of that victimization, get you to think about the real questions that lead to a much bigger conspiracy. These guys are leading you to a state of disbelief and paralysis. I'm trying to tell you that there's knowledge to be gained from real anomalies of the intelligence services, foreign and domestic. But you're not asking the right questions. These people are not asking the right questions. That's why they're dead in the water. Because they should be still prospering with all these conspiracies that they make, the fringe ones anyway. But they die out in time. Why? Because it gets quite boring when you repeat something every 5 years. I try to provide daily content with information that you never have heard before every day. I try at least, whether in video or in article data form. I do a podcast. I interview people who are whistleblowers, not fake whistleblowers, real whistleblowers who got in trouble for speaking out by their respective intelligence agencies, so that you can hear for yourself about information that could have prevented 9/11. Let's see.
And on my next one, the Popular Mechanics book also fails to deal with another claim on which there is unanimity, that if Al-Qaeda terrorists had hijacked an airliner in order to crash it into the Pentagon, they would have not chosen to hit Wedge 1.
As if they knew where to hit, right? The point was to hit the Pentagon. Ray Griffin is jumping through hoops here, saying that Al-Qaeda should have hit the other side because that's where the Secretary of Defense was. Not realizing, to Griffin's, this is not shocking, is that there are thousands of people inside the Pentagon moving about through the 5 rings of the Pentagon. And the Pentagon is a tremendous complex, miles and miles and miles long, right? As a building, it's one of the biggest buildings in the world, okay? How did Al-Qaeda specifically know where specific offices exist? They didn't, right? They didn't know where Rumsfeld was sitting. They didn't know where the PEOC was. They didn't know where all these things were. Their point was to crash a plane into the Pentagon. That's it. No matter where it was, just crash the plane into the Pentagon. The message was an attack on the Pentagon. That was the message. The message wasn't, oh, attack the office of naval, the naval office. Oh, attack the PEOC. Attack where Rumsfeld is sitting. No, that wasn't the point. The point was to crash the plane into the Pentagon. See, and Griffin saying, well, Al Qaeda should have known exactly where to attack. Why is that? Why? They didn't care who they killed. And what if Rumsfeld actually was walking to Wedge 1 and he got killed in the way? They wouldn't know where he's going to be walking at one point in time. No idea. This is just silly, this argument.
This claim is based on several empirical facts
Like what?
about this section of the Pentagon. For one thing, Wedge 1 was the only section that had been renovated to make it less vulnerable to terrorist attacks.
False. Well, demonstrably false. Wedge 1 was under the renovation project, which is headed by Lee Evey, the director of the Pentagon Renovation Project. It started in the mid-1990s, and it took that long to try and reinforce Wedge 1 because they saw what happened at the Oklahoma Murrah building, where a lot of people were killed because the blast basically shattered the glass inside the office and basically shredded these people. And that the Pentagon was always a terrorist target, even in the 90s. All right. Now, that was coming from the intelligence services like the CIA and the DIA. All right. So they wanted to reinforce the whole building with this lime grass and these bomb resistant windows. And guess what happened? That section of the Pentagon basically was attacked. And guess what? It survived to an extent. Thank goodness they did that, because a lot of people could have been killed due to the blast itself. More people were killed by the jet fuel than they were by the blast. How about that one, Griffin?
Also, because the renovation was not yet complete, it was only sparsely populated. A strike on any other part of the Pentagon, therefore, would have caused far more damage.
As if Al Qaeda knew that. Like, you're assuming that they knew this, or they didn't know this. Well, they didn't, actually. They didn't know this. Did they know that there was a renovation project going on at Pentagon? How would they know that?
And far more death. Moreover, terrorists who hated America would presumably have wanted to kill some of the Pentagon's top brass and the Secretary of Defense. And yet these people were safely on the opposite side of the Pentagon.
And you're assuming that they knew this. You're just blind. See, this is why this is disingenuous, right? Because you're assuming that they knew the specifics of the offices of the Pentagon.
As far from Wedge 1 as possible. All these facts, moreover, were well known. If these terrorists...
What facts are you using to suggest that Al Qaeda knew this? You're assuming that Al Qaeda knew this. What facts are you referring to, by the way? You're not presenting anything.
Were brilliant enough to outfox the world's most sophisticated defense system.
No, they didn't outfox it. That's why there were additional planes in the second wave of attacks. That was brought up by Moussaoui in his trial, that he said that he was part of a second wave of attacks. Well, guess what? Khalid Sheikh Mohammed wanted a second wave of attacks. 10 planes. Remember Bajinka plot? That really happened. It's a plot that didn't materialize, but it really happened. Maybe that's the reason why they didn't tell the FBI, who got the file of Abdul Hakim Murad, that they didn't do anything with it. Now it's coming from the Philippines interrogators. Rodolfo Mendoza, the lead Bajinka dossier file, is the lead of the Bajinka bombing investigation. He conducted the interview with Abdul Hakim Murad. And he said that he gave a dossier file to the FBI, and the FBI did nothing with it. That's 1996, folks. 5 years prior to 9/11 attacks. Did the FBI basically go to the National Security Council and say, hey, I think since our airlines are now under intense scrutiny by terrorists, maybe we should enforce security there? Oh, let's not stop there. Why don't we try and make it stricter for the immigration naturalization services of people, countries affiliated with terrorism like Afghanistan, Pakistan? They didn't. Why is that? That's the question you and the truth movement need to ask. Because if you're just going to say, hey, did you know a third building fell? Or, hey, did you know that there were no hijackers? Well, where does that lead you? Nowhere.
They would not have gone out of their way to hit Wedge 1
Well,
when they could have simply crashed into the roof above the offices of Donald.
which would make it harder. Like there's going to be a plane that knows right like this. They would have to do this. Right, right. So, I mean, that's ridiculous. First, you say that he's not an experienced pilot. Second, oh, he should have made an even harder maneuver.
Rumsfeld
Make up your mind.
and the senior officers. Here is what Popular Mechanics says about this problem. That was it.
Again, Griffin, why would they opine about something they're not experienced in? They're not airline pilots. They did the right thing. Just like I did the right thing about the World Trade Center. I have no experience in this. Go talk to people who have experience in engineering. Go talk to an airline mechanic. Go talk to a demolition expert. I don't know anything about it. My opinion is fruitless, useless. So that's one thing I'll give them their credit. Popular Mechanics didn't want to opine about something they're not experienced in. And then you claim that, oh, you see, they had no opinion on this because they're covering for the official story. No. In fact, you're doing more than just advocating for the you're doing more in the disservice of the people by spreading these fringe conspiracy theories. The CIA doesn't have to do anything, Griffin. You're doing it for them.
Popular Mechanics has definitely not defended the idea that the Pentagon was struck by American Flight 77 under the control of Hani Hanjour. Another problem with the official conspiracy theory involves the crash of United Flight 93 in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, by default.
At first, the official story was that it crashed because the heroic passengers brought it down. The story was later changed to say that the hijackers brought it down because they feared that the heroic passengers were going to overcome them and gain control of the plane. And so they brought it down at 580 miles per hour. From the first, however, there was considerable evidence that the flight was actually shot down by a U.S. military jet. This evidence is of many types. Witnesses reported seeing debris falling from the plane. Debris was spread over an 8-mile area. One engine or part of it was found far from the crash site, suggesting that it was hit by a heat-seeking missile. There was no plane at the crash site, leaving officials with no option but to claim that the plane had buried itself.
Well, that's not true. They found more of this plane than at any crash site. It was just in little pieces. And this is what happens when you have a plane carrying 11,000 gallons of fuel. I mean, 11,000 gallons of fuel, which equals to 78,000 pounds, going at 580 miles an hour. I'm sorry, this ain't cartoons where you'll see Wile E. Coyote go through a mountain rock and you'll see his outline, okay? That's not what's gonna happen here. You're not gonna see large pieces of the plane here. It's vaporized. It blew up into a million pieces. Do you realize if that's what it did to the plane, can you imagine what it did to a human body, which 90% is water? What it's gonna do? It's going to liquefy you. And this is the reason why when Wally Miller got to Shanksville, the crash site, he basically said, I stopped being a corner because I didn't see any bodies or a drop of blood. Well, guess what? That's true because it basically vaporized in the explosion, which was seen by the residents of Somerset County. And for you, you basically say, now this is where I understand, oh, well, we never see this with ordinary plane crashes. Well, guess what? That's right. Because with ordinary plane crashes, you notice that the plane dumps the fuel and tries to land safely at the lowest speeds possible. That wasn't the case on 9/11, where they were doing the exact opposite. They took fully loaded planes going from East Coast to West Coast and crashing them intentionally at the highest speeds possible. We saw that with PSA 1771. We saw that with Germanwings 9525 in 2015. And lately, we saw that with the China flight. I forgot the name of the flight number. Look at every instance of those flights and look at the crash site. Does it look similar to Shanksville? Yes, it does. Why? They never found whole bodies. They never found whole engines or large pieces of the plane. Every single intentional crash site is similar to the one in Shanksville. But people like Jason Burmis and David Ray Griffin and Barbara Honegger will basically move the hoops and say, well, that's not true. One is soft ground, one is hard ground, one is this, one is that. You know, they keep, because they can't admit it. Because the official story has to be opposed, no matter if the alternative theory is absolutely ridiculous. And that means that everybody involved with witnessing the plane crash, with the search and rescue, with the transcribing of the technical data, that's the FAA, the NTSB, the FBI, FEMA, even local and state first responders, all have to be in on it or coerced, which means that those in the fringe community have to prove all this. Guess what? 2022, they never have. They never will. To them, the impossible is true. Instead of having just the ordinary, planes were hijacked. They crashed into the World Trade Center, Pentagon, and Shanksville. You don't have to involve anybody. You just have to have air defense located somewhere else. That's it. You don't have to involve people from the public industries. We have to make sure they stay quiet or go along with the program, which would involve thousands of more people to make sure they're being monitored closely and not say any words to the media after 21 years. You know how ridiculous this is?
Completely underground, except, of course, for the bandana and the passport.
And as well as the ID card belonging to C.C. Lyles, the can opener that was belonging to one of the flight attendants, the ID card of the Florida taxi cab driver, the thousands of pieces of mail, the bandana was found, a burnt passport belonging to one of the hijackers. I think it was Ziad Jarrah, was a burnt passport. A business card belonging to his uncle, which I know you're not going to bring up, Asim Al-Jarrah. Who's Asim Al-Jarrah? Go look him up. By the way, there's no hijackers. You don't have to. Go look up the Jarrah family. Here's my hint for you. Why do you think he's not? Why is he protecting that? Why is Christopher Bolin, Jew? Why is he not bringing up the Jarrah story? Why doesn't Griffin do that? Why doesn't Barbara Honegger do that? Why doesn't Rebecca Roth do that? Why doesn't, well, Jason Burmis a little bit, but he doesn't get into the details. Why do these people suddenly cover up that part? And if you want to know what I'm talking about, go look up Ali Al-Jarrah. Go look up Asim Al-Jarrah. Why do these people always push the no hijacker theory? Makes you wonder.
Several residents in the area reported seeing a small white jet.
Nope. What they did report was seeing a plane crashing into the ground. The small white jet came later, and that was the C-130 plane driven by Colonel Stephen O'Brien, who was in the area and asked, which is on the FAA tapes, which is public, okay? It was asked by the FAA in Washington and in Cleveland to go follow American Airlines 93 because he was in Washington, D.C., and he saw an American Airlines 77 crash into the Pentagon. The FAA contacted him. Unbelievable.
Plane prior to the crash and hearing sounds suggesting a shoot down by a missile.
Yeah, let's just say the shoot down really happened. What's the problem here? Government did its job. Shut down 93. What's the problem? Think about it. If David Ray Griffin is suggesting that Flight 93 was shut down, what's the problem here? They did their job. More power to them. Did their job. Why is this a conspiracy? What's wrong with this story?
One resident said she received a call from a friend who reported shortly after the crash, that her husband, who was in the Air Force, had called and said, "I can't talk, but we just shot down a plane." One of the oldest
Right, because the plane was nosediving into the ground. How did she know that? She was in the house.
pilots reported being
That's like
told
listening to April Gallup, right? You know, Jason Bermas and Hanukkah love to bring up April Gallup, right? Oh, she didn't see a plane debris when she crawled out of the hole. First of all, one, she didn't crawl out; she fainted, and that's coming from her own testimony to the Library of Congress. They don't mention that. And also, why are you asking a person who's inside the building? What about all the hundreds of other people, including the 86 people who specifically saw American Airlines? Recorded people. No, they'd rather listen to the one person who wasn't even there for the impact. And by the way, April Gallup, so solidified in her belief that, oh, no plane really crashed into the Pentagon, ended up suing American Airlines and Osama bin Laden in 2011. And according to her, it was because if other theories are true, then I should benefit because I'm a victim. I have to look out for my son. So for her, it was about the money. And the courts saw right through it. In fact, the courts labeled her case as a frivolous lawsuit, so frivolous that the courts fined her lawyers $5,000 each.
after he returned to base that an airliner had been shot down in Pennsylvania by a military F-16. Popular Mechanics deals with a few of the items in this list by distorting the evidence, and with the rest by simply ignoring them. You can read all of this in my book. Here I will focus on.
Again, Popular Mechanics did not talk about it because they're building engineers. The mere fact that they didn't opine about something they're not experienced in, we consider them being honest. If they're not experts in this field, then their opinions are meaningless, just like yours, but you're making it known.
Only on the most important element in its attempted refutation of the claim that United 93 was shot down. This is the claim that made by the 9/11 Commission that the military could not possibly have shot the plane down because it didn't even know the plane had been hijacked until after it had crashed. Here is Popular Mechanics' statement as to whether a fighter could have shot down the plane. The 9/11 Commission report is clear that no shoot-down order was in place for Flight 93 due to garbled communication between the various agencies. When the flight crashed, NORAD was still unaware the plane had been hijacked. It is true that the 9/11 Commission makes this claim, but is this claim supported by the available facts? The editors of Popular Mechanics, in their introduction, said that they were going to confront the claims of the 9/11 Truth Movement with the facts. But what they do here is simply confront the claim of the 9/11 Truth Movement with the claim made by the 9/11 Commission that the military did not learn about the hijacking of Flight 93 until 10:07, several minutes after it had crashed. In citing this claim as authoritative, it simply ignores the empirical fact that many of the participants made statements that contradicted the Commission's claim. Here are some examples. General Larry Arnold was the commanding general of NORAD within the continental United States. When asked by the 9/11 Commission what NORAD was doing at 9/24, Arnold said, "Our focus was on Flight 93, which was being pointed out to us very aggressively by the FAA. 9/24 was 40 minutes earlier than the 9/11 Commission later claims the FAA told the military about this flight." During an interview with Peter Jennings on ABC in 2002, Brigadier General Montague Winfield, who was the Deputy Director of Operations at the National Military Command Center in the Pentagon, said, "We received the report from the FAA that Flight 93 had turned off its transponder and was heading towards Washington, D.C. Other military officers have testified that, besides knowing about United 93, the military was tracking it. 2 days after 9/11, General Myers himself said that fighters were scrambled on the airliner that eventually crashed in Pennsylvania. We had gotten somebody close to it. 2 days after 9/11, Paul Wolfowitz, who was then Deputy Secretary of Defense, said that the Air Force was tracking the hijacked plane that crashed in Pennsylvania and had been in position to bring it down if necessary. In 2002, Colonel Robert Marr, the head of NORAD, told Peter Jennings that having received shoot-down authorization from Richard Clark, he passed that on to the pilots, adding, United Airlines Flight 93 will not be allowed to reach Washington, D.C. 2 pilots, moreover, have independently said that they received those orders and would have shot down Flight 93 if it had not crashed on its own. Like Wolfowitz, these pilots deny that the flight was actually shot down. But the question at issue is the 9/11 Commission's claim that the military did not even know that this flight had been hijacked.
Because it was not reported as a hijacking. Yes, transponder was turned off. Yes, it didn't receive the radio transmissions from the ground. Okay, they didn't respond to it. But it wasn't a reported hijacking. And that's what's needed in order to conduct a shoot down order. I mean, it is beyond the scope of like thinking that you're ignorant. It's just that you basically will just twist and misinterpret things so that your alternative views can make sense to you, because you just can't basically bring about to agree that some parts of the official story is true. And it has to be opposed at all costs. This is what I believe about you people. That somehow, through 20 years of repetition from people like Griffin, that the whole 9/11 Commission report is false, that it's untrue, that there's no hijackers, that there's no hijacked planes, that the phone calls are faked, that there's nuclear devices in the World Trade Center, that there was hologram planes, that there was invisible space beams, Judy Wood space beams, that there was missiles made to look like planes, that there was swap overs. All of this was drummed into you, beat into you, just like what the media does every day to its viewership, by propagating propaganda, by propagating disinformation, by propagating misinformation, in the hopes that you don't make a decision. That's what the government does, but that's exactly what these people do. Those are the fringe conspiracy movements. Both lead to inaction, a state of paralysis, mental paralysis, if you will. To know something. That's why knowledge is so important. That's why I'm really strict when it comes to knowledge. Why I do these videos, in the hopes that I'm trying to reach not the skeptics or debunkers. I'm trying to reach those who've been victimized by people like Griffin. This is not a video made to degrade you, insult you. I'm hoping to like make you think. Stop believing in belief. I want you to know something, because we can act on it, and we need more people. That's how you build a movement. You can't build a movement on inaction. Truth movement. Well, guess what? What truth does he said today? And has there been any action on his part? Any movement on his part? This was 2007. It's now 2022. Where's David Ray Griffin now with this miraculous revelation that he said tonight? Nowhere. He's retired now from public life. No longer active in the truth movement. Nobody's gone to court with his information and been successful.
And their testimony, like that of Arnold, Clark, Marr, Myers, Wolfowitz, and Winfield, directly contradicts that claim. We have extremely strong evidence, therefore, that insofar as the NORAD tapes given to the 9/11 Commission and Michael Bronner say otherwise, they have been doctored. They do not provide the authentic military history of 9/11 or anything close to it. In this lecture, I've given several examples of what you can learn about 9/11.
We haven't learned anything. You've given a multitude of fringe conspiracy theories that are not backed by any evidence whatsoever. Nothing. Especially the Pentagon issue. Wow. Shanksville, you really didn't go into depth with. And World Trade Center, I can't really speak on that. So, but man, I mean, really, what have we learned today? Well, we learned what fringe conspiracies are. They're accusations, they're statements from a irrational kind most of the time that is not backed by any empirical data. And what's ironic is that you named this lecture, Let's Get Empirical. Wow. I'm stunned. This is the reason why you won't see people like Griffin debate. Christopher Bolin, Rebecca Roth, Jason Burmis, Honegger, they don't debate. I've called out Burmis numerous times, won't do it. Honegger, won't do it. Bolin, won't do it. I only need 5 minutes. I'll keep doing these videos in the hopes of trying to reach that audience, to make you think, to make you come away with knowledge, because that's what I want. I don't want to sit in an echo chamber. What's to be gained? What's to be learned? So that's the end of the video. I hope you guys got something, that you learned something from it. If you do, comment below, and I'll see you next time. Have a good night, guys.
If you get empirical, checking the actual
Empirical.
facts